Hi all. We're here to talk about navigating a divorce when you're in a toxic relationship. Angelica, can you go ahead and get us started with an introduction?
Yes, my name is Angelica Griegel. I'm a toxic relationship expert. I have a master's degree in clinical psychology and counseling from Columbia University, and I help people navigate unhealthy toxic relationship dynamics within divorce and all areas of their life, including family members or friendships or even work environments.
Kristin and Maureen, you're up. Can you talk about your roles at Turco Legal?
I'm Kristin Sherman. I'm a partner at Turco Legal, and I'm head of the mediation practice.
Maureen?
Maureen Booth. I'm a senior attorney at Turco Legal, and I am also a guardian ad litem appointed by several counties in eastern Massachusetts to investigate child custody and parenting plans in divorce and custody actions.
All right, back to you, Angelica. Can you explain what a toxic relationship is in the context of a divorce?
So, a toxic relationship in the context of divorce is really when somebody is asserting control over another person. And other signs could be you're walking on eggshells, one party is feeling on edge constantly, of course, verbal assaults and emotional or physical abuse, gaslighting, circular conversations, feeling like you're never good enough, that you might be the problem when you're not. And also, you just feel it in your body when you're in a toxic relationship. You might have anxiety, or you might just be on edge constantly. So, the stress of divorce with a toxic person or a narcissist can definitely get to you, and you can fall into some really unhealthy coping mechanisms like reaching for alcohol or self medicating, or even shutting down completely and internalizing everything. So you don't process anything, you just hold it all in, which can lead to depression, anxiety, and other health issues. So it's important to have a healthy support system, professional support like myself, and healthy coping strategies like meditation, exercise, eating nutritious foods, good sleep hygiene, and also just socializing.
What are your thoughts on that, Kristin? Given what Angelica has just said about how someone might react when they're in a toxic relationship, how do you go about navigating the litigation process when you're the attorney for someone who might be in that situation?
Yeah, I think it's very important to set expectations. If you're litigating and one of the parties is toxic or is trying to sabotage the process, or there's some sort of abusive element, in terms of expectations, sometimes the process can take longer. The other person might try to, refuse to turn over documents or may not cooperate with the process. So you need to understand that it might take a little bit longer. The courts are slow, as we all know. And if you're dealing with one party who's not cooperative, it can exacerbate that. So you need to figure out a way to be able to handle that and process that. It can be more expensive. The more time you spend litigating, it costs more with legal fees. And so you need to weigh that cost, the emotional and the cost of litigating versus whatever the issue is that you're fighting over. And you need to understand that it's harder on children the longer litigation goes on, the more conflict that there is. That takes a toll on children if you're not able to protect the kids from whatever is going on. So it's really important that the kids don't know about what mom or dad did, or what court case is coming up, or if there's a hearing date. You need to shield them from that as much as possible. And especially judges really, really don't like that because it's not good for the kids. So you don't need to involve the children in any kind of communication. Communication should never go through the kids. You want to leave the kids out of it, and don't, talk badly about either parent. That really takes a toll on children. And you need to understand that the other party may not be coming from a logical place. They're emotional. They could be making decisions they normally wouldn't make. You have to try to get to a point where you can remove yourself and look at things logically and try not to react, as we spoke about before. Before you write something, before you say something, really think about it. Don't respond to negative or inflammatory text, those kinds of things. So if you can, especially if you're working with a therapist or someone, to get some techniques to just be able to get through it in a way that you can come out the other side and protect your kids as much as possible is really important.
Kristin, you talked about the possibility of someone working with a therapist. Are there times when you would recommend that?
I often do recommend that some of my clients work with a therapist. I mean, we get some clients and they seem fine and they're able to handle whatever's going on. Maybe the relationship isn't high conflict, but if someone's having a real difficult time emotionally with making decisions or just processing things, or sometimes people don't really appreciate the toll their actions are having on their children, those might be situations where I would say, hey, I have a great therapist I can recommend you, refer you to. And also it saves money. If you can work out some of these issues that you're struggling with and come to terms with things with a therapist, and then you can bring that to me, that gives me a place to start from. And we're not working through those issues through the litigation.
Particularly early in a divorce, when all of your emotions are just so extreme, I have recommended and have found that if parties can get into therapy early, whether it's depression, anger, fear, all of those are normal responses to a divorce. So learning that that's normal and having a positive and constructive place to vent and discuss those feelings that is not the children. Because pouring that onto the children and allowing them to be exposed to those emotions is creates what experts call a toxic stress in children, and it's actually extremely bad for them. As a GAL, this is what we're looking for later down the road when the court appoints a GAL to do an investigation for custody or parenting time. Everybody wants to say that they're the better parent and may spend a lot of time and resources pointing out the faults of the other parent, when a lot of times what we're really looking for is their capacity is, in one regard, to shield the children from the stress and the conflict of the divorce itself, and to get the children through this hard time, this transition in the family's life, in the family itself. So we're not oftentimes looking for who's the more blameworthy party. We're looking for which is the better caretaker of the children's emotions through this process. That's one of the main indicators. And that's oftentimes the party that can take the conflict and the stress out of it, not add more to it.
Maureen, how would you navigate if we'll say victim of abuse, so the person who's not the toxic person in the marriage when it was going on, but the result of the abuse has caused them to become sort of toxic? They react, they yell, they use substances. How would you navigate that type of situation when they were not the original abuser? They're still not an abuser, but they are exhibiting unstable behaviors and it's affecting the child.
We often see that, Angelica, as a GAL and as practitioners in the field. And that's what I think we've discussed as situational toxicity, where the parties wind up reacting to each other. As a GAL, I would recommend therapy for both parties and probably the children too, so that everyone in the family unit has a safe and constructive place to discuss and process through those feelings. And hopefully for the parents to be able to learn how to co-parent again, productively and constructively without harming their children. We may look back at the history of this marriage and be able to say, yes, you weren't the original abuser. Well, there's an understanding that this is a response and perhaps a perfectly normal response. The court is more concerned with what is harming the children. That has to be the court's primary concern. And parents, no matter what is happening with them, their primary responsibility, as far as the court is concerned, is to take care of their children, no matter what's going on in their lives, including this divorce. So, as Kristin said, we see parents that enlist children as sort of pawns or adultify the children and think that it's helping them when in fact, helping them in their legal case, when in fact it's damaging their children. And the court looks very poorly upon that type of behavior.
And I could add to that as well. If we're representing the client who maybe is the toxic person in the relationship, you would want to advise them of that, as Maureen said, that, I know you're trying to get the kids on your side, but actually the judge is really going to hold this against you saying this or doing this. And also I would encourage them to, think about if you send your spouse that these kinds of emails, this is how they react. And sometimes it's in front of the kids and that hurts your children. So I know, sometimes people don't think of that chain of events. And another thing is you want to remind that client that, yes, you're maybe getting back at that other person by prolonging this process and all of that, but it's also affecting your client negatively. They're going to be spending more legal fees. They're going to be spending more of their life and time in court. And they're going to be damaging potentially their children by, prolonging this high conflict situation. So you just want to advise them as best you can and encourage them to think about what they write and what they say, especially with respect to the kids and communications with their spouse.
How do you determine which party is the toxic one? Because oftentimes the historically toxic one can put on a good front and act calm, cool, and collected, which is what I've seen with my own clients. And then the one who has been historically abused is unhinged and reacting from a place of trauma, and they seem and are very unstable. So do you have a certain process for determining which person is stable and if there might be abuse that's not apparent?
Well, those are always difficult issues. And as we have discussed, a lot of times it can be situational, where this is not representative of who this person really is, but is more a response, a fear response, an anger response to what they perceive is happening in their family right now. But as a GAL in a case, I would first look at what the court ordered. What am I investigating? Custody, is this parenting plan? I look obviously at the history of this family, but a lot of times the court is not looking to determine which party is more toxic. It's looking for which party is the better caretaker of the children, and which party is inserting more conflict into this family versus which party is trying to take the conflict out to better manage the family going forward, is the better communicator, all those sorts of things. You don't have to continue to like your spouse going forward, but if you're co-parenting, you have to communicate. To the extent that you're able to do so, it helps to be friendly, but it's a horrible situation where children are afraid if both of their parents are going to show up at Susie's play, and Susie's afraid to invite both parents. Susie shouldn't have to deal with that, and that's what the court is thinking about.
I think that absolutely highlights why each person should be in therapy to navigate their reactions and their coping mechanisms from the stress, and also being the best parent they can be for their children, because ultimately the children are the most important.
Kristin, let's talk about divorce mediation. From your perspective as a mediator, is mediation possible when there's a toxic relationship?
It can be possible. Sometimes it just depends on the degree of the conflict between the parties. If both people are looking for a resolution and are willing to participate, even if one party is maybe more toxic or more angry, or there's these other issues in the relationship, sometimes you can get past it if you both have the goal of trying to resolve the case. And I just have to be mindful to make sure that I'm listening to both parties, that one party isn't taking over the conversation. When I'm mediating some clients, if I notice there's a power imbalance, or if there seems to be something going on, I just have to be really mindful to make sure that I'm getting input from both parties and that one party isn't kind of taking over the mediation. So it can be done. It can't be done if one party is refusing to participate, then you're not going to be able to mediate. If someone really doesn't want a divorce and they are not participating in any way, you can't make them participate in the process. And so in that case, that might be a case where you need to just file a complaint. And sometimes people come back to mediation once they realize that this is really happening. It's going to move forward, whether they want it to or not. If there's a large power imbalance, sometimes it can be difficult to mediate. If one person is really domineering or isn't working with the other person, sometimes that can be a challenge to mediate. Or if someone feels unsafe or afraid to participate, that's another situation where it's going to be difficult to come to a resolution. If one of the parties is extremely unreasonable or has really unrealistic expectations, that can be a situation where it's challenging to mediate. So my job is to try to help the parties come to an agreement that both parties can live with, and to advise the parties that a court is not going to approve an agreement if it's really one-sided or if it's not in the best interest of the children. So my job is not to tell them what to do, but to help them come to an agreement. So that can be difficult to do if one party is really unreasonable and isn't, if they're saying, I'm not going to pay any child support, or they've been married for 20 years and they're saying, I'm going to keep all the retirement.
Which is why it's important to have an experienced family law attorney working with you, which can inform you of what the court typically will and won't do as far as approval of a separation agreement, or what you typically see. Because unlike in most courts, there isn't a winner and a loser in probate court, in divorce cases. So whether it's via mediation or via settlement prior to going to trial, it's much easier to be able to work with opposing counsel and the other party and take some of the conflict, the power imbalance out of it, because injecting that into your case, if you have the toxic party, it's incumbent upon me as that person's attorney to let them know that's not helping their case. And as Kristin said earlier, it's not helping their children easier. And the court will often find against that party for that type of behavior. So it's important for me as that person's attorney to let them know that and to sort of guide them. What's often typically a normal response in reaction to feeling threatened or attacked or whatever they may feel. And so they come out fighting. But that may not be the best response. And in fact is damaging them in this situation. And because we know that and we don't have their emotional response, that's why we can often help guide them. As far as drafting emails, don't send that right now, or maybe this is a better way to say that, or ways to deal with the children, how to present themselves in depositions, things like that. We can help get them from here to there without doing damage to their case, costing them tens of thousands of dollars, and most importantly, doing damage to their children.
So Angelica, once someone has finally made it through the divorce process, what can that person do to avoid finding themselves in another toxic relationship?
They should absolutely get professional help, because there's always a root cause for why you ended up in a toxic relationship, why you couldn't set boundaries, why you accepted less than you deserve. And until that part is healed, you will find yourself ending up in another toxic relationship and another toxic relationship, and the cycle will continue until you address those subconscious. So you're operating from like an operating system, that's your subconscious, and that's going to continue as the default operating system until you actually reprogram it. So 100%, if you're not in therapy or coaching of some kind during your divorce, getting into it afterwards is a priority if you don't want to end up in another toxic relationship.
As attorneys, we often see repeat clients who, after the divorce is final, issues keep coming up with co-parenting or contempts, and it's hard for people to move on. And that's where I think a good therapist would help the parties recognize what the triggers are, and to not be so emotionally responsive. So, if mom says this at the baseball game, can we get to the point where dad doesn't say this back? Or vice versa, like helping those people to understand how not to react and co-parent with the other person, because they're going to be dealing with that person until the children are emancipated or the rest of their lives potentially. So I think it's very important to get to a place even after the divorce so you're not coming back.
Angelica, is a toxic relationship always an abusive relationship?
I think it's a difficult question because there can be elements of toxic, like a dynamic between somebody that's toxic or codependent, but that isn't exactly abusive. So I would say no, a toxic relationship is not always abuse. It could just be a simple dynamic, like people who are always bickering, like that could be conceived as toxic.
Thank you all so much for engaging in today's conversation. Angelica, if someone wants to reach out to you to talk more about how you can support them through their divorce, what's a good way for them to do that?
They can either call or text me at 857-800-9798, or they can reach me on my website, www.breakthroughloveyourlife.com. Or I can be reached on Psychology Today. All you have to do is Google my name and Psychology Today, and my profile should pop up.
If you would like to learn more about your legal options in a divorce or family law case, you can schedule a free legal consultation with the team at Turco Legal by calling 866-995-6663 or visiting turcolegal.com. Thank you for tuning in.